Rita, thank you so much for joining us today. You've sat on the board of huge organisations, including ASOS, John Lewis, and the WWF. Why do you think imposter syndrome still impacts you despite your career successes?
Well, you might have seen the figures about just how many people seem to experience imposter syndrome. We're talking about 70% of people at some point or other experience imposter syndrome. And that goes up to something like 90% in the creative industries. So if anyone who's listening in experiences imposter syndrome, you're in very good company. People like Tom Hanks, Michelle Obama, Emma Watson, the award-winning actress Olivia Colman, they all experienced and talked about having imposter syndrome. And in fact, Olivia Colman talks about every time she goes on set, she thinks she's going to get fired. But actually, what's interesting there is that she thinks it actually provides quite an important drive, a drive to improve, to stretch herself, to rehearse more. And that's why I think even at this stage in my career, I still have some of these feelings and experiences, which is, it's a new company or it's a new step, and am I going to know enough and do enough, etc. So actually, I've had some kind of drive. We've all got drives that come from somewhere in our backgrounds, our childhood, school, whatever. We've all got certain drives. And at some point or other, it's really good to do some work on how you're going to let those drive you, or otherwise whether or not you need some help in looking at those drives and using those drives maybe in a positive way. So after all these years, I've kind of learnt a bit more about how to use some of these feelings and some of these drives in a more positive way. So these days, I look over my shoulder at the imposter and go, I know why you're there, thank you, because you're going to make me work harder, stretch myself more. And above all, it's a normal human thing. If 70% of humanity tends to experience imposter syndrome, it starts to feel slightly less like a syndrome and more like a normal part of being a human being. So many people share it.
Now, you've spoken in the past about how imposter syndrome is not always a bad thing. Is that down to the fact that it can drive you forward in your life?
There is an element of that, definitely. And harnessing that drive so that actually it provides fuel to propel you forward, providing you can look at it in a positive way. I mean, I've got to grudgingly appreciate my imposter, but for some people, a minority of people, imposter syndrome can be debilitating, and it's really good to get some professional help on that if so. I think that the other thing about imposter syndrome is that it is so common and it is so very human. And frankly, if we all need anything in business these days, in building relationships, either with our colleagues or indeed with customers, broader stakeholders outside, it's that actually we need to make sure we both are and also come across as being more human. That would be good for business. It's certainly good when you're running a company or leading a company. You need to illustrate, symbolize some of the values of the things that you hold dear. So I think that, talking about imposter syndrome, recognizing it, sharing some of these experiences with other people, as one human being to another, this is good. And it actually creates empathy and builds relationships in a way that I think is really healthy and strong and necessary, actually, for how we all need to do business in the future.
Now, you've touched on empathy there, and that's another area that I want to talk to you about. So empathy has become a little bit of a buzzword of late, used by businesses, used by leaders, but for the better. This is I think a really clear sign that leadership has been focusing more on that human connection with their colleagues, with their peers, with their employees over the past 12, 18, 24 months. What should empathy look like from a leadership perspective? What does it mean to you?
Well, I mean, you say that empathy, is a buzzword. I mean, it's a little bit like the conversations that we can all have about purpose. People talk about purpose with a capital P, as though somehow it's a new idea. Whereas actually, if you look into the back and beyond of business books, I mean, one of my favourite business books is Built to Last. And actually what that proves is that actually over a 70-year period, those companies, those organizations that were values-led, purpose-led, had a strong core ideology, outperformed those organizations that didn't have such a strong heart and soul. So the importance of purpose has always been there, and how it's lit up founders and driven founders to business as well. But now, of course, you can hardly move for articles, books, and everything else written about purpose. I don't mind whether or not it's become a sort of buzzword, just as long as people are doing the right thing. And what we can demonstrate, of course, is that purpose-led businesses do outperform the average of other businesses that tend not to have such a clear sense or clear ideology. So when it comes to empathy, I think it's quite similar, which is, of course, in order to build relationships, personally and professionally, since time immemorial, it's been important to show empathy, to connect as a human being. And I think if business has had, one of the huge problems is that it does not necessarily seem to be a human place to be. Often senior business people are caricatured, a bit like the alien nation, wearing corporate uniforms, spouting corporate jargon, paying themselves in a way that's sort of out of this world. That feels so more like an alien nation. This is not good. It's not good for any of us, because we need businesses to succeed in order to generate the kind of funds for schools and hospitals and civil society. So we need business to succeed, and that means that business has got to be good. So, what I often say is the world needs changing. Business runs the world, so we need to change business. And clearly, to build long-term sustainable businesses that are built on long-term sustainable relationships with stakeholders, trusting relationships with stakeholders, you need to both be empathetic and show empathy. And again, that's human to human. And it's a really important thing for business leaders to show that they are human. They've got pets and families and pulses and consciences and, goodness me, even a sense of humour. It's really, really important that we are able to come out as the human beings that we are and show that we care about other things that human beings care about. And thank goodness we are looking at, better business, more purpose-led businesses actually that are more open and also much more engaged in society, and long may it continue.
Now, looking at that more human to human element and ensuring that you're not becoming a caricature of a business leader, as you talked about, part of that is to do with authenticity and being your authentic self, which is something we're going to be talking about in a bit more detail later on today, and something that you've talked about in the past yourself. So what's your advice on striking the balance between being an authentic person, your authentic self in the workplace, but also at the same time accepting that there are still certain professional norms to adhere to?
Sure. Well, people quite often give others the advice about, how to succeed in the workplace, or how to get on, and they often say, you need to be yourself. Now, I do subscribe to that. You need to be yourself, but I don't know about you or anyone else, but there are certain things about being myself I'm not necessarily wanting to parade around every day. No one particularly needs to know that you like hanging out in your dressing gown, eating crisps, watching Homes Under the Hammer, those sort of things. Even though, frankly, we've all worn elasticated trousers for the last year, and I'm not quite sure how tall everybody is. Sometimes I'm dealing with, but nevertheless, I think that what I would tend to say is be your best self. I mean, you're never going to be as good at being someone else. So in my view, you've got to start with, who are you? What are your strengths? What are your goals? And be your best self. And I say be yourself and make most of yourself, because sometimes people do give the advice as well of, you need to fake it to make it. Why don't you try faking it to make it, or act as if? I don't like that advice. And the reason why I don't like that advice, I think it encourages people to think about themselves almost, as a third-party construct, as like an inhuman avatar. And there was a TV program, a TV series once called Faking It. I don't know whether you remember it or indeed any of the people on this call, but it had a series of people. So a classical cellist learned over a month to become a club DJ. A Humber burger van man learned how to be a sort of Gordon Ramsay type sort of shouty chef. And what happened with these people is that, they were coached over a month by experts to help them, develop skills and characteristics that will enable them to fool an expert set of judges at the end of that 1 month period who had to spot them as the faker from amongst people who really did do the job. And a lot of people succeeded in fooling the judges. So what that demonstrated is obviously we can all be more than maybe we currently think we can be, and learn more skills and more quickly. But what you also saw was these people over a month, they would break down, cry, say they couldn't do it. It was a huge stress and strain. And what I'd say is that you can fake it for a TV program for a month, but you can't fake it day in, day out in your personal or your professional life. It either makes you miserable or ill in the end. And from a personal point of view, I remember when I first became a chief executive, I used to think, gosh, I think I know that, chief executives need to be a certain way and sort of, act the arse kicking sort of on top of it at CEO. I think I even got photographs taken where I was kind of crossing my arms, looking over my shoulder in that sort of CEO pose. But what I found actually after a few months is that, this wasn't me at all. It was quite a strain to keep that up. It was a loss of energy. Trying to pretend that you were something that you weren't was actually a bad use of my energy. And I got some coaching. And what I discovered from that coaching is actually one of the things that really drives me is I want to help other people become brilliant. It gives me a huge sort of personal reward to look at people and think, you can really develop yourself. You've got a lot of potential. You need to want to see people be brilliant. I think if you don't want that, you don't have the right to call yourself a leader. And my natural instinct on leadership style was to nurture people to do that, not to kick their ass, but actually rather bring them out. And frankly, that can mean tough love as well. What I'm not saying is you have to kind of avoid difficult conversations and, and be nicey nice. Nice is good. Kindness is very good. But you do need sometimes to give some tough love. But that came from a good place because I wanted to help people be better. And I found that more nurturing style of leadership was much more me. And actually, as a result, I was able to lead in a way that I really wanted to, that I felt good about. Having become CEO, we had 50-50 men and women on the executive team. We did personal bursary programs. We did quite a lot of self-development stuff. We did yoga. I think there was even a choir at one point. I really was able to do many of the things that I believed in. But I was able in the end to do that as myself, not as some sort of corporate CEO construct. And I think it's really important. And particularly now, of course, in this day and age, where in the digital world, everything you say and do on the inside gets through to the outside world with a scale and a speed that will take your breath away. So make sure that the reality that gets to the outside is the right reality. And you need to work on yourself and your leadership style, and also, of course, helping the people within your company know what the purpose is, know how they can really help do that. And I hope really enjoy their job, so they tell other people it's a great company, and then they tell customers, and the virtuous circle goes on. So be your best self inside and outside.
Going back to imposter syndrome, what do you do in situations where you maybe lack confidence or feel inadequate or out of place?
Yeah. Well, I think one of my early memories about this was actually when I first went up to university, and there are a lot of people who came from expensive schools. I had come from a state grammar school. They had smart cars. We didn't. I didn't know how to hold my knife properly. I was certainly wearing the wrong shoes. I mean, I did feel, I have to say, a bit inadequate. Although in the end, I found that actually quite a useful drive, because I thought, I do want to make more of myself, and I can do it in a different way, in a way that actually I felt more authentic and comfortable with. And what was interesting is, having done a book, Love Your Imposter, I was very lucky to get Hillary Clinton gave a testimonial for the book, because she herself had suffered or experienced imposter syndrome. And she said when she first went to Wellesley College, she looked around and thought, gosh, all these women are smarter than me. And that was some advice that she gave to her younger self. So, you are in good company if you do have these feelings. What I find very useful, though, if I go into a business meeting, or I'm going to make a big speech for the first time, or otherwise that I'm concerned, over the years, I've learned some tools and techniques for doing that. Positive visualization, for example, how to do breathing in a way that calms you, how to use your voice, how to use eye contact, your posture and how you carry yourself. There are a lot of really important tools and techniques. And in fact, I'm running some workshops in the autumn just to explore some of these to help people with just this kind of thing. And if in doubt, rescue remedy. I've always found this quite useful. I got acquainted with Mr. Bark some years ago. It's not for everybody, I have to say. And when I read
I'm a big fan myself.
Well, excellent. Well, you probably read the ingredients on the back, and then you realise why it's so effective. So it's extracts of rock rose, clematis, star of Bethlehem, cherry palm. Doesn't that sound nice? And 27% alcohol. That's possibly why it's very effective. But nevertheless, in all seriousness, there are so many things you can do. And also, of course, there's no substitute for knowing your stuff. And that can be understanding finance, for example, because knowing the numbers and the data and the financials can really give you confidence. So that's a very important skill for us all to learn if we want to end up running organisations. And also saying yes to speaking engagements or speaking requests, because we need to do about 10,000 hours to be really great at something. That's what Malcolm Gladwell showed in Outliers. So you need to rehearse a lot to give yourself confidence. And, it's an important part of getting on to be a leader, to be able to be a good communicator using some of the tools and techniques too. So all these things can help really with confidence, I find.
Rita, thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you.
Great. Well, thank you very much for having me, and, love our imposters. Yeah.
We're now going to be taking a short break, so go and grab a coffee and we'll see you back here shortly.